bring the House Criminal Justice Committee to order for Wednesday, March 17th, St. Patrick's Day, and also my wife and I's kiss-anniversary. Madam Clerk, please call the roll.
Representatives Beck, Campbell, Dixie, Doggett, Farmer, Griffey, Hardaway, Hawk, Howell, Holsey, Lamar, Lamberth, Moody, Russell, Sherrill, Vice Chairman Sexton, Chairman Curcio.
Here.
Chairman, you have a quorum.
Thank you. Members, before we get started, any personal orders? Seeing none, we have a full calendar today. I do want to announce, in case anyone's here to see this bill move forward, House Bill 1338, which is item number 2 on your calendar, is rolled 1 week without objection. Rolled 1 week. That brings us item number 1, House Bill 119 by Chairman Faison. Sir, you're recognized. Sir, you have a motion and a second.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Committee, very good to be with y'all again. And happy kiss-anniversary, Mr. Chairman.
I'll tell the missus.
And when I was just thinking about this piece of legislation I'm bringing to y'all, unfortunately, each one of us, not unfortunately, but it's part of life, each one of us will get older and older. And I know it's a terrible thing. And GA's 95, y'all, and people don't even realize that. But as my grandmother, and I told some of y'all last week, as she aged, she developed Alzheimer's, and it was devastating. And I was thinking towards the end of her life, she didn't want to be touched, and she sure didn't want to be kissed. And it's a sweet, affectionate thing, but when people go through stuff like this with this disease, it rocks your world. And members, what this bill does, it's called a Silver Alert bill. It acts just like the Amber Alert that we use for our children. And that's what we're seeking to do to the Department of Safety and TDOT to be able to get out the message quickly in your neighborhoods and your areas that there's somebody missing who is a senior citizen, and to be on the lookout. That's what this bill does.
Thank you, Chairman Faison. We appreciate the bill and the sentiment of the bill. Chairman Hawk, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate the work of the sponsor and the work that's been done as we look at a Finance Committee note on this. I know we've got a semblance of a Silver Alert in place right now, but I want to see that our friends with every association, Alzheimer's Tennessee, Alzheimer's Association, all the different associations that are working on this has been something critically important for them for quite some time. And I support your legislation. I want to see this across the finish line. So thank you very much.
Sir.
Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, sir. Leader Lamberth, you're recognized.
Move previous question.
Previous question's been called without objection. We're ready to vote. All those in favor of sending House Bill 119 to Finance, please signify by saying aye. Aye. Those opposed? Sir, you head to Finance. That brings us to item number 3. We will roll it to the heel without objection to the heel. That brings us to item number 4, House Bill 585 by Chairman Terry. Chairman Terry is here in the room. Sir, you have a motion and a second. You're recognized.
Thank you, Chairman and Committee. Harassment in the state of Tennessee is defined in Tennessee Code 3917-308. It carries a charge of a Class A misdemeanor. So when you harass one individual, you infringe on that one individual's liberty. When one knowingly harasses a first responder, those actions have repercussions beyond the individual liberty of that responder, as it could impact the recruitment and retention of first responders to protect our communities, thus impacting the liberty of a community and those individuals within. So this legislation increases the penalty for harassment of a first responder to a Class E felony. As this legislation is not merely in defense of first responders, it stands to protect the liberty of every individual who relies on their aid and will help recruitment and retention of first responders.
Thank you, Chairman Terry. Representative Campbell, I have you first on my list.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Move previous question.
Previous question's been called without objection. I do see objection. So then we're voting on previous question. All those in favor of previous question, please signify by saying aye. Aye. Those opposed? Previous question prevails. We're now voting on the bill. All those in favor of sending House Bill 585 to Finance, please signify by saying aye. Aye. Those opposed? Sir, you head to Finance.
Thank you, Chairman and Committee.
Yes, sir. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman.
Representative Hardaway, for what purpose?
Parliamentary inquiry.
Yes, sir.
Are we going to have a chance to ask questions on any of these bills?
Yes, sir. If you ask to be, put your name on the list, I'd be happy to call on you as soon as your name comes up.
Okay, I'll ask my colleagues. Sometimes there's a question to be asked so that not only will we better understand the bill, but we got folks out there in internet land that don't have our calendars and don't have our experiences walking in the halls. That a simple question, like I simply wanted to ask, is this while on duty or not on duty, et cetera? So I'll ask my colleagues to be as considerate as I plan to be to them. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Leader Lamberth, you recognized?
Merely for the same purpose, I will say that I take every opportunity to plug the online site. And so if someone is watching this committee right now, the Capitol.tn.gov site actually has the calendars on there. It has the language of the bill. It has the amendments now. It's been something we've been working on for years. And so fortunately, they have available to them. And while every member obviously should get on the list and ask any questions they would like, but my friend from Shelby County brought up a great point that all of this is available online. And our constituents and anyone that cares about these issues can study these just as all of us have and know every single detail of them. And so that's available. And I would encourage folks to utilize that whenever possible.
Thank you, Leader Lamberth. Members, without further ado, that brings us to item number 5, House Bill 1180 by Chairman Moody. Chairman Moody, you're recognized. Ma'am, you have a motion and a second.
Thank you very much, Chairman and committee. Again, this is one of those bills from last year. Same, nothing's changed. But what it does, it adds human trafficking under the definition of predatory offenses. And with that, if there are any questions?
Thank you, Chairman Moody. First on my list, I have Representative Hardaway. You're recognized, sir.
No question, Mr. Chairman. I just wanted to get on that just in case. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Next on my list, I have Chairman Hawk. You're recognized.
Move previous question.
Previous question's been called. Without objection, we're ready to vote. All those in favor of sending House Bill 1180 to calendar and rules, please signify by saying aye. Aye. Those opposed, ma'am, you had to calendar and rules.
Thank you.
Next up, item number 6, also by Chair Lady Moody, House Bill 153. You have a motion and a second.
Thank you very much, committee and Chairman. Again, this is another one of those one of those bills. Same song, second verse. But what this does, when our law enforcement agencies would make seizures, they are allowed to continue to get the guns, but, you know, there's kind of a limit there. So this bill, and I can read you some of the things that they are would be allowed to exchange it for. But first of all, they cannot get the money back for budgeting for equipment. They can only get other items, and they have to petition the court before any of this happens and get their permission to purchase such items as, if they needed guns, of course, ammunition, bulletproof vests, body cameras, car cameras, radios, surveillance equipment, cars, holsters, binoculars, drug test kits. They even can get gun locks to hand out to families in the neighborhoods to protect their children from accidental shootings. There certainly is several other things, but that kind of gives you a flavor of what each agency might need in particular instead of just having a stockpile of guns. So any questions, I'll be happy to try to answer.
Chairman Farmer, you're recognized. Previous question's been called. Without objection, we're ready to vote. All those in favor of sending House Bill 153 to calendar and rules, please signify by saying aye. Aye. Those opposed? Ma'am, you had to calendar and rules. Thank you very much. That brings us to item number 7, House Bill 66 by Chairman Doggett. Second.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Yes, sir. You have a motion and a second. You're properly recognized. I see no amendments.
Well, thank you very much. No amendments indeed. What this bill does is looks at the sex offender evaluation and treatment has been legislatively placed under the auspices of the Sex Offender Treatment Board, who is by statute the sole authority in promulgating standards for sex offender evaluation and treatment. Now, what this bill is doing is that we are trying to ensure that, or trying to resolve a matter where there has been unauthorized providers that have been conducting sex offender evaluations and treatment, meaning that they have not been in accordance with with the standards that the board has set. So being a sex offender treatment provider requires an individual be appropriately licensed as a mental health professional and meet the Sex Offender Treatment Board standards of conduct and evaluations and treatment. So we're hoping to resolve this issue and bring everyone back into the fold.
Thank you, members. You've heard the explanation. First on my list, I have Chairman Halsey. You're recognized, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just had one question. If a court clerk refers this bad guy to one of these groups, for example, he refers them to Bubba's Psychological Counseling Feed Store and Tire Center, if that happens, according to the punishment side of this, it goes against Bubba. I didn't understand why the referral side did not have a penalty if they refer them to a wrong agency.
Chairman Doggett, you're recognized.
If you will, stand by just one moment, please. All right, I just wanted to clarify.
Chairman Doggett,
there.
you recognized.
Thank you, sir. Bubba can get his tires swapped out. He can get him a sack of feed, but he's going to have to go by the approved vendor list that they have there that will be here through the board. So it's on Bubba to make sure that he's going to see an approved evaluator, provider.
Chairman Halsey. Okay, pass. Leader Lamberth, you recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And Chairman Doggett, thank you for carrying this bill. I know this has been an issue you've been passionate about for years on making sure that sex offenders who commit these crimes are held accountable. And to my colleague's question from earlier, I mean, these are convicted sex offenders that we're talking about. We want them to get help. We want them to get the treatment they need and to alter their ways, but it needs to be done through an approved provider. And so that's the whole point of this bill, is that those providers a list be provided to these individuals that are convicted, and that they are not going to a substandard or subpar place for treatment or counseling. I mean, they've got to go to a highly renowned and certified place. So that's just not happening enough right now. Hopefully what would happen, and I think it's be difficult to prove, but hopefully if they're getting better services, the chances of them reoffending in these horrendous crimes would be reduced. Not all can get help, but for those that can, we want it to be high quality.
Next on the list, I have Representative Lamar. You recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just a quick question or inquiry. Once they go through the program, is there a record erased clean, or is still, so it's not erased clean?
No, ma'am.
Okay.
No, ma'am.
Representative Griffey, you recognized. Previous question's been called. Without objection, we're ready to vote. All those in favor of sending House Bill 66 to calendar and rules, please signify by saying aye. Aye. Those opposed? Sir, Chairman Doggett, you head to calendar and rules. Thank you, sir. Next up, also by Chairman Doggett, House Bill 1006. Motion. Second. Sir, you have a motion and a second.
Thank you very much, Chairman, Mr. Chairman. This is some legislation last year. I do believe it was from our dear friend, Jim Coley, that had brought this through the committee and on the House floor, where it passed 95-0 last year before COVID happened. So we're bringing it back this year. It's a very good bill. What it is doing is simply in the language in TCA 37-1148 states that a sexually explicit image of a minor, and it's substituting that with sexually explicit image of a minor or an image of sexual activity involving a minor. This is something that has been happening and occurring where it's been known as exposing, where videos or images were taken of minors in sexually explicit situations and shared without their knowledge. And so we're hoping to address that with this legislation.
Thank you, Chairman Doggett. First on my list, I have Representative Russell. You recognized.
Previous question, please.
Previous question's been called. Without objection, we're ready to vote. All those in favor of sending House Bill 1006 to calendar and rules, please signify by saying aye. Aye. Those opposed? Sir, you head to calendar and rules.
Thank you very much.
Yes, sir. That brings us to our next item, number 9, House Bill 901, also by Chairman Doggett. Motion. Sir, you have a motion and a second, properly recognized.
Thank you very much. This here, again, deals with sex offenders. It's making some minute changes, some technical changes that you might see in various sections of the code. In some places where we look at, it's an A misdemeanor to impersonate a character or to drive an enticing vehicle, such as an ice cream truck. It's an A misdemeanor, whereas it should be an E felony. This should not be a citable offense. And so what's happening is law enforcement is citing these people, and it should be something that's arrestable. Second section of that deals with written permission for a parent or a guardian to pick up a child from school. If there's a violation of that, it creates an issue, so it's being lowered to from a felony, E felony, to an A misdemeanor, so that a citation may be issued for such offense. The third part of this bill, for getting an ID, that currently, if you don't have your driver's license with you, excuse me, or your identification, that's an E felony. We're lowering this to an A misdemeanor so that the officer can issue a citation in that event, and removing the term punishable by fine only and lowering to A misdemeanors. They're now stronger enforceable than before. The final phase, final section of this bill deals with reporting. It closes a loophole which allows offenders not to register in a timely manner if they were incarcerated by the same entity that handles the registration, even if the place of incarceration and registration are not at the same location. By removing this phase, it better aligns the letter of spirit of law together and removes confusion on the offenders for post-conviction, post-incarceration. Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman Doggett. First on my list, I have Representative Hardaway. You're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. To the sponsor, I'm with you on everything, except I don't understand why we lower the penalty from a felony, Class E felony, to a Class A misdemeanor for being on school property or daycare or in a park setting.
Chairman Doggett.
And thank you for the question. And that is a good question. I know that I've got a colleague sitting in this vicinity that was probably going to ask the same things here because he's asked me these before, but I will say this. Don't want to give the impression that we're going light on sex offenders. Certainly not. When you read the language of the code in which it's written, when you go through and look at that, for instance, that part about the at the school where they're there, where they pick up their children, it's an E felony punishable by fine only. Whereas if we lower it to a misdemeanor, then a citation can be issued, which is makes more sense it's a better mechanism to get them back into court. The other way, for getting your ID, lowering it to a misdemeanor instead of the felony, so that you're not pulling someone off the road, you're not arresting someone and taking them into jail. So we're trying to make things a little bit more consistent, a little bit easier for law enforcement, especially those officers who are in charge of dealing with sex offenders at those registering agencies throughout our state.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Representative Hardaway. Seeing no other questions, we're ready to vote. All those in favor of sending House Bill 901 to Finance, please signify by saying aye. Aye. Those opposed? Sir, you head to Finance.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Members, that brings us to the heel of our calendar. Item number 3, HJR 140 by Vice Chairman Ogles. Vice Chairman Ogles, you're recognized. You have a motion and a second.
Thank you, Chairman, members of committee. There is an amendment on the bill. Drafting code 005299.
One moment, please. It's not on. Chairman Ogle moves amendment coded 5299. And, sir, it looks like that amendment makes the bill. If you could please explain the amendment.
Thank you, Chairman, members of the committee. There was a little bit of a change. We actually had sent this over to the Attorney General's office to double check some wording.
Members, I apologize. We need a motion and a second on the amendment. Sir, you have a motion and a second. You're ready.
And we had some clarification of some wording and had to clean up a little language just to be sure the intent was followed in the legislation, and that was my fault. But I'll read the as drafted, and if I may, the General Assembly shall have no power to authorize by law nor enact through repeal of previous statute rape, sex trafficking, prostitution, or the use of a substance other than that prescribed by an authorized physician found on the Federal Controlled Substance Act issued in the United States Department of Justice and the United States Drug Enforcement Agency as such existed on January 1st, 2020. Members, this piece of legislation is a change of the Constitution. I know that's something we hold very dearly and something we're very careful to do, but I'd like to briefly discuss. Actually, Chairman, would you like to vote on the amendment first?
Yes, I actually have a question about your amendment.
Yes.
So I'll just go ahead and ask it while we're on it, because it is specific to the amendment. I noticed that you changed human trafficking to sex trafficking, and to me that would seem to narrow that a little bit. I'm just curious if that was intentional or.
Yes, and that was the major part of the provision by the Attorney General, simply because we have not well-defined human trafficking in TCA as much as we have sex trafficking, and with that, we're going to have to insert a definition. Human trafficking also could bring up some possible open doors for some litigation in the prisons, as well as some other things where groups from outside states have come in and effectively challenged legislation. So in the discussion, in the back and the forth with several groups, the human trafficking wording as is right now in TCA was a bit problematic, and that was from input of several people. So yes, to answer your question, sex trafficking does narrow the scope of the wording.
Okay. Next on the list, I have Representative Lamar. You recognized?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just a clarification question. Say, for example, the federal government legalizes marijuana. Would your legislation conflict with that?
Chairman Ogles?
Thank you, Chairman. Yes, because right now marijuana is scheduled as a controlled substance. I believe it's a Schedule I narcotic. And if that were to happen, we would have to revise this provision and take it up and actually go back and amend the Constitution. So yes, it would take a substantial process.
Representative Lamar, you recognize?
So this bill will outlaw the decriminalization of marijuana as well?
Chairman Ogles. This bill says mostly for the, and the word non-recreational in there, I would say the door is left open for prescribed as by a physician. If that were to become decriminalized at the federal level and be an approved substance that physicians could prescribe, at that point, this bill does not preclude that from happening, but it does kind of close the door for what we would consider widespread recreational unrestricted use.
So it would ban, sorry.
Representative Lamar, you recognize?
My apologies. So it would take away the ability to allow recreational marijuana in Tennessee in its entirety, regardless of.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Sorry. Regardless of what the federal government potentially may put in place.
Chairman Ogles.
Thank you, Chairman. Well, it wouldn't take away because that's not a right anyone in Tennessee has right now. It would just make the process to have that right, I would say, a bit more difficult in that you would have to go through the multiple readings and the revision process like we're going through now. So it would be a higher bar to attain that. You'd have multiple readings through two sessions. First reading, and I know most of you know this, first reading of a constitutional amendment is a simple majority on the floor. Second reading in the second General Assembly is a supermajority, 2/3 vote, at which point it would go to the ballot and have to be affirmed by our constituents and the general public on the ballot and pass on the ballot.
Representative Lamar for follow-up.
Last thing, I'm gonna leave you alone. I know that about half the states in the union are either at decriminalization or recreational use of marijuana. You know, why do we have to include that? And I think it's no secret that I'm also pushing a decriminalization bill, and I'm a supporter of the decriminalization, and I've made that very, very public. So that is my concern. But could you talk about how we would conflict with what many other states are already in the process of doing? And that's my last comment.
Chairman Ogles, you recommend?
Chairman, if you may. I won't speak specifically of the number of states that have decriminalized it. I know several have. I don't know, and I don't want to say totally agree with you that half have. I know there's been movements across various states. Idaho recently took up an amendment much like this to say that they were going to put that in the Constitution. So there are states going the other way on this, which I hope Tennessee will. But to speak to that, I know the Surgeon General said in 2017 that 1 in 7 Americans suffers from substance abuse. And as our leader spoke on the record several weeks ago, marijuana is one of the largest substances listed in Tennessee that people are checked into rehabilitation services for. And I do believe that unchecked, that will be extremely detrimental to families in the state, as well as the other provision of this amendment, which speaks to the prostitution, sex trafficking, and rape. That's something that 1 in 4 women in this nation suffer from. So between the 1 in 4, 1 in 7, what we speak to in this legislation touches more than half of the homes in this state. So that's why I thought it was pertinent that we take up and discuss on the ballot. And thank you for your question.
Next on the list, I have Leader Lamberth. You recognized?
Thank you. I just wanted to my colleague's point. This is a proposed constitutional amendment. It's the first reading of this. It would have to pass this session. It would have to wait 2 years out past the next session, and then it would go on the next gubernatorial ballot. So not next year, but literally 4 years out from next year for 2026. And it just asked the people to determine whether or not they feel like this should be in the Constitution. And I do want to just remind folks that there are 2 different criminal codes that deal with marijuana. I mean, at the federal level, it is illegal, and at the state level, it is illegal. So regardless of what the federal level does, and I don't think they should be in the business of determining what is criminal at the state level at all. I think that's a 10th Amendment issue. That should be our decision as the voice of the people here. But even if the federal government legalized every drug, it would still be up to each state as to whether or not those substances were legal here. And so that would still be our call, and this would merely really put it on the ballot and get a feel from the people as to whether or not what they think about that. And so there's really no downside here in putting this on the ballot. Again, 5.5 years out, to let the people just speak on this issue and see if these type of crimes they would prefer not to ever have legalized in this state. But I don't think it ties our hands, and it's a lengthy process. So it's a long conversation, and I appreciate you bringing the bill because it gets it to the people. And again, I can't imagine where it would be a bad thing to hear the voice of the people on these issues.
Next on my list, I have Representative Griffey. You recognized?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, sponsor, for bringing this. My question is this: you changed the language of it regarding marijuana with the amendment. So, as it's written, just so I understand clearly, the General Assembly would have no power to authorize by law the use of a substance unless it's prescribed by an authorized physician found on the Controlled Substance Act, which essentially, correct me if I'm wrong, would outlaw by constitutional amendment the authorization for recreational marijuana, but it would not necessarily outlaw medical marijuana if the citizens of Tennessee adopted this proposed constitutional amendment. Is that fair assessment?
Chairman Ogles, you recognize?
I believe that is a fair assessment with the one stipulation that it was prescribed by a licensed physician. We would have to amend the process of being sure that those physicians were licensed in this state, which is another kind of caveat to being sure that there would be guardrails on this in the future.
Representative Griffey, you recognize?
Thank you very much. Look, the issue of marijuana use, decriminalizing it, medical marijuana has plagued, I think, legislators throughout America for many, many years now. And I applaud you to put the issue to the citizens, because we are up here as their elected representatives. We're not their rulers. They are the rulers, and we act in their, at their behest. I think a proposed amendment to let the citizens voice their opinion, whether they want recreational marijuana or medical marijuana, it might be an appropriate avenue, so the citizens of Tennessee can tell us what they want to do on this. But anyway, I encourage you on that. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Chairman Ogles, you recognize?
Thank you, Chairman. And to that, I think that's part of the process we've learned up here, is, at least I have as being a member of the General Assembly. We're often hit with numbers and data and polls that I feel are somewhat very inaccurate. And I think one of the best determinations of how people actually feel is what they do at the ballot. So regardless where you're at on some of these issues, I think it's important for every citizen in the state to be able to go and push a button, either affirming or weighing in opposing some of these issues. I love the fact that people have the ability to let their opinion be known.
Next on the list, I have Chairman Hawk.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And we had a brief conversation in the hallway, and I'm going to sound naive, and this question is not going to come out the way I intended, so I may need some smarter people to help clarify this. We've got the green books, and we've got 4 particular green books that deal with criminal law. I'm wondering what the precedent is for inclusion of those 4 green books, criminal law, into the Constitution. Are there precedent for items such as this to be included in the Constitution? And I go back to the time that I've served, a constitutional amendment on marriage between a man and a woman, and other constitutional amendments that we've worked on. And I just want to know where this falls in terms of precedent inside the Constitution.
Chairman Ogles.
Chairman, if you may, I have a little list I jotted down, just flipping through, and I'll differentiate between Articles 1 and 2 versus Article 11, but I'll just read through a list of some of the things we've taken up and included in the Constitution. Suffrage, search and seizure, right to counsel, double jeopardy, undue rigor in our jails, excessive bail, no imprisonment for debt, no punishment under martial or military law, right to bear arms, the right not to be compelled to bear arms in times not of war, safe prisons, slavery, involuntary servitude, due process. Article 11, where this would be taken up, the General Assembly shall have no right to change someone's name, the right to grant divorce, no power to suspend general law for the purpose of a corporation or a person. And this is the one, no power to make a private act, no power to tax income, homestead exemptions, and most recently, I think, 2010, we enacted legislation to protect fish and game. So that's the one that really stood out to me. We've enacted legislation to protect fish and game in this state, and yet we haven't spoken to rape, prostitution, and sex trafficking, as well as controlled substance.
Chairman Hawk, you recognize.
And thank you very much. And I think that everyone in this, on this committee, and everyone in the state of Tennessee is going to agree that murder is wrong, rape is wrong, involuntary servitude is wrong, human trafficking or sex trafficking, as it may be termed, and prostitution are all wrong. And the inclusion of the plant issue that we're talking about, whether that is or not, that's up for debate, but I agree with you on that. But I'm wondering if that's something that we take those, and I keep referencing the 4 green books that I sit side by side in my office and look at daily, into the Constitution, if there's a role for that. So just comments, Mr. Chairman, thank you so much.
Thank you, sir. Next on the list, I have Chairman Howell. You recognize?
Previous question, Mr. Speaker.
Previous question's been called. Without objection, we're ready to vote on the amendment. All those in favor of attaching amendment coded 5299 to HJR 140, please signify by saying aye. Aye. Those opposed? You adopt. Brings us to HJR 140 as amended. All those in favor of sending HJR 140 as amended to calendar and rules, please signify by saying aye. Those opposed? No. Madam Clerk, call the roll.
Representatives Beck? No. Campbell? Aye. Dixie? Doggett? Aye. Farmer? Griffey? Aye. Hardaway? No. Hawk?
Aye.
Howell? Aye. Halsey? Aye. Lamar? No. Lamberth? Aye. Moody? Aye. Russell?
Aye.
Cheryl? Aye. Vice Chairman Sexton? Chairman Curcio?
Thank you. Oh, aye, sorry.
Chairman, you have 11 ayes, 3 noes.
All right. I need my yeses to be louder. HJR 140 moves on to calendar and rules.
Thank you, Chairman. And for the record, I did not make a roll call vote for
I
that,
know,
but thank you.
I'm surprised. All right, members, that brings us to the conclusion of today's calendar. We are adjourned.